After the storms of yesterday, a calm has fallen on London this morning. The Thames unruffled, the wind no longer scurrying down the streets. Each year on this day, the second Sunday in November, the nation's thoughts turn to the simple monument of Portland stone at the end of Whitehall, the Cenotaph. Here and at countless other memorials across the country, we remember those killed in war. Foremost among them, the dead of the two world wars which scarred the face of the 20th century. But also those killed and wounded in the other conflicts of our turbulent times. Here on the mainland of Britain, two generations have now grown up accustomed to the comforts of peace. But their interest in those wars and their respect for those who fought them seems, if anything, to grow with the passing years. It was to keep the memories alive that the Cenotaph of Portland stone was unveiled 80 years ago. Two years after the end of the First World War, the body of a soldier, his name, rank and regiment unknown, had been brought from France to London for burial in Westminster Abbey. Chief mourner beside the coffin was the King, George V. As the second anniversary of the armistice which ended war approached, the 11th hour of the 11th day of November, the crowds looked on in silence. Nearly 1 million British and Empire soldiers had died on the battlefields of France and Flanders. It was the idea of an army chaplain that one of these men should be honored on behalf of all of them. An officer, said to have been blindfolded, chose a body at random. The body was escorted to England with full military honors, to be buried alongside kings and statesmen at the very entrance to Westminster Abbey. As the cenotaph was unveiled, all eyes were on the coffin borne past it, the unknown warrior. Someone's son or brother, someone's friend or sweetheart, known to everyone and to no one. And back from Westminster Abbey, the Henry VII Chapel at the East End, we can see the parade this morning already forming up at the Cenotaph. To the east, an officer and troopers of the Blues and Royals, and officers and gunners from the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery, and they'll be firing a single round on Horse Guards to mark the beginning and end of the 2-minute silence. Major Jeremy Bagshaw in command of 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, and for the second time in the Guard of Honour, an officer and 3 men of the Royal Gurkha Rifles. The Royal Logistics Corps, the Adjutant General's Corps, the Territorial Army and the civilian services, police and fire and ambulance and prison services, the Red Cross and the WRVS. And the bands of the Grenadier Coldstream Irish and Welsh Guards, under the direction of the Senior Director of Music Guards Division, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Hill's Grenadier Guards, who play the music of remembrance, which begins, as always, with Rule Britannia. And now, Hearts of Oak. And next, the Minstrel Boy. And to the west of the Cenotaph, the Royal Marines from our squadron of the Fleet Royal Marines Protection Group, based in Scotland. And to their right, men and women of the Royal Air Force, including the Queen's Colour Squadron from Uxbridge, and nurses from the Royal Air Force Nursing Service, and representatives of the Merchant Air Service. And then the Naval Detachment. The Merchant Navy and Fishing Fleets are here, Her Majesty's Coast Guard, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, Royal Naval Nurses from Haslar and Derriford, and of course the officers and ratings of the Royal Navy, men and women, drawn from every trade in the Navy, from ships, from shore establishments, from submarines, and from the air squadrons. After men of Harlech, the pipers from the 1st Battalion Scots Guards and the 1st Battalion Royal Scots play the Sky Boat Song. As the sounds of the pipes waft away down Whitehall, the mass bands now play Isle of Beauty, David of the White Rock, and Oft in the Stilly Night. And as they play, a moment to remember some of those whose role in the wars was dangerous, not glamorous, but essential for victory. On the high seas, the merchant navy with its red ensign played a vital role, keeping Britain supplied from the first day of the Second World War to the last. The men who served under the Red Duster, as it was affectionately known, were volunteers who'd come from all corners of the earth. Many of them were beyond military age. Some had earned their tickets on the old square riggers, and then there were others whose sea legs were barely out of short trousers. Without them, Britain faced disaster. They were in the front line, their convoys running the gauntlet of prowling U-boats as they trundled across the oceans. In 1940, a converted cargo ship steamed into legend. The Jervis Bay, armed with only a few obsolete guns, engaged a German battleship so that her convoy could escape. One seaman said it was like watching a bulldog attack a bear. Captain Fogarty Fagan was awarded a posthumous VC for valor in challenging hopeless odds. And there was another epic struggle that year, its memory still kept alive today in the Imperial War Museum. This jolly boat was launched by a crew of 7 after their ship was blown out of the water on its way to Argentina. 5 of them eventually died, 2 in a suicide pact. Before jumping over the side of the boat, they left their shirts behind for those in the boat, but kept their trousers on, joking there might be mermaids where we are going. After 10 weeks adrift, 2 survivors reached the Bahamas, Robert Tapscott and Roy Widdicombe. They hadn't eaten for 46 days. Their last drink had been the alcohol from the boat's compass. They'd endured a voyage of 2,500 miles, a feat comparable only to that of Captain Bligh after the mutiny on the Bounty. 35,000 merchant seamen died at sea, and some of their names can be seen on this London memorial, a lasting debt of the gratitude we owe them. The pipers of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards and the 1st Battalion Royal Scots now play the haunting melody, Flowers of the Forest. And this is an appropriate moment to remember the gallant role played in 1940 by the Scottish regiments of the 51st Highland Division. During the evacuation from Dunkirk, Churchill promised the French that Britain would stand by her ally. As massed troops clambered to safety aboard the little ships, An entire infantry division was left behind, their job to encourage the French to fight on. The 51st Highland Division is remembered at St. Valery-en-Caux. The 51st had long been one of the most impressive divisions in the British Army. They'd fought the Battle of France with invincible spirit, but when they reached the Channel, the odds against them were overwhelming. Virtually out of ammunition, 1,000 died in a heroic last stand. Surrounded by Rommel's tanks, their commanding officer, General Fortune, was ordered by their French command to surrender. "11,000 men spent the rest of the war in prison camps. The 51st was Scotland's pride. Its loss devastated the country, particularly the Highlands, where whole communities found themselves bereft. And next, the mass bands play Nimrod from Elgar's Enigma Variations. And now Dido's Lament by Purcell. When I am laid in earth, remember me. "60 years ago, the Battle of Britain pilots proved that they could defeat the enemy over these skies. But by the autumn of 1940, the many took up the battle from the few. As the skies darkened with German bombers prowling above Britain, Churchill predicted that the courage of the British people would withstand any onslaught. In the Blitz, major cities and ports were the targets, the aim to destroy a nation's morale. "5,000 children were among the 60,000 civilians who died. Many of these people had served on the home front, and this year a memorial was laid in their honor. Fittingly, the plaque rests in the bombed shell of Coventry Cathedral. It was on a moonlit November night in 1940 that the city suffered an airborne assault on a scale never seen before. The fires were so fierce they were visible to approaching bombers 150 miles away. The people of Coventry woke to find their city shattered. Their spiritual home might lie in ruins, but they were not cowed. In defiance, one man made a cross from the wreckage, a symbol of faith in desperate times. And St. Paul's Cathedral, standing there in the middle of all its modern buildings, takes us back also to the Blitz in London in 1940, when it was surrounded by fires, barrage balloons, the Observer Corps, the firefighters, as London suffered the Blitz. The brass cross as the clergy come out from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, carried by the crucifer Yaqub al-Sami, who was once one of the children of the Chapels Royal. And he now leads the 10 children of the Chapels Royal in their scarlet and gold. The Bishop of London, Right Reverend and Right Honourable Richard Charters, who will be taking the short service here at the Cenotaph this morning. Behind the 10 children who sing at the Chapels Royal, in surplices, the 6 gentlemen under their choirmaster, Andrew Gant. The Major General's procession, General Officer commanding London District and Major General commanding the Household Division, Major General Sir Evelyn Webb Carter, and with him his Chief of Staff, aide-de-camp. His brigade major stays by the entrance, and he goes to take up his position to the north of the Cenotaph. And the music changes to the Supreme Sacrifice. And we await now the politicians, led by the Prime Minister, who come out also from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, William Hague, the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Charles Kennedy, of the Ulster Unionists, David Trimble, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Robin Cook, Lord Chancellor beside him, former Prime Ministers, Sir Edward Heath, the Father of the House, Baroness Thatcher, John Major. left, the Lord Chancellor, Lord Irvine, and the new Speaker of the House of Commons. To his right, Mr. Martin. And now the Chiefs of Defence Staff. General Sir Charles Guthrie leading them with no wreath. To his right, the Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sir Michael Boyce. And behind, the Chief of the General Staff, that is the Army Staff, General Sir Michael Walker, the Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Peter Squire, and the representatives of the merchant and civilian services, Captain Bob Thornton for the Merchant Navy and Fishing Fleets, Margaret Frost for the Merchant Air Service, Graham Meldrum, Chief Inspector of the Fire Services. And now the 47 High Commissioners, or Acting High Commissioners, who will be laying wreaths this morning, because Commonwealth troops fought alongside the British in every theatre in World War II, many of them from large countries like India and Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, who come here, but many too from the smallest, St. Lucia or Tonga or Brunei. And the presence of these Commonwealth High Commissioners is a reminder of how the free world united against the Nazi threat. Absent, though in a way they'd complete the story, the forces of the United States and of the former Soviet Union. And this year, the religious denominations who come out now are for the first time represented not only by the Christian churches and the Jewish faith, but by Buddhists, Hindus and Muslims. The Venerable Tawalama Bandula, representing the Sri Lankan Sangha Sabha of Great Britain, the senior Buddhist monk. Yusuf Balok, representing the General Muslim Council. Om Prakash Sharma, the President of the National Council of Hindu Temples. Indrajit Singh, Chairman of the Network of Sikh Organizations. And the bearded figure, the last one to take his place there, His Eminence the Archbishop Gregorius of Thyatira and Great Britain for the Greek Orthodox Church. And now, led by Her Majesty the Queen, the royal party, with the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prince of Wales, the Duke of York, the Princess Royal, and the Duke of Kent. And in a moment, the 2-minute silence, observed by many yesterday at 11 o'clock on the 11th day of November, but observed again throughout the country this morning. So short a time to remember so much. On behalf of the nation, Her Majesty the Queen is handed her wreath and places it at the foot of the cenotaph. And next, the Duke of Edinburgh. The Prince of Wales, in the uniform of a Rear Admiral of the Royal Navy. The Duke of York, who served in the Falklands, in the uniform of a Commander of the Royal Navy. The Princess Royal, in the uniform of a Chief Commandant for Women, Royal Navy. And the Duke of Kent, in the uniform of a Field Marshal of the British Army, who this year has served 30 years as President of the War Graves Commission. And a final wreath is laid on behalf of a member of the royal family who's not here this morning, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. It's the second year she's not been able to be here following a fall in this her 101st year, but maybe she's watching this ceremony on television and perhaps remembering her brother, killed in the Black Watch in World War I. As the band plays Beethoven's Funeral March No. 1 in B flat, the politicians lay their wreaths, led by the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Politicians on whose shoulders lies the heavy responsibility of deciding when to commit our armed forces to battle, a decision already faced by the present Prime Minister in Sierra Leone and Kosovo, and by all of his predecessors. And he is followed by the Leader of the Opposition, William Hague. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Charles Kennedy. The leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, David Trimble. leader of the Scottish National Party parliamentary group, Alistair Morgan. And next, on behalf of the dependent territories still left, a special wreath made up at Kew Gardens of orchids and olive and crowberry and myrtle and mangrove, laid by the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Robin Cook. And now the turn of the High Commissioners and Deputy High Commissioners. First, those from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Ghana. And now Malaysia, Cyprus, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, and Kenya. The south side of Cenotaph, the representatives of Malawi, Malta, Zambia, the Gambia, Maldives, Singapore, Guyana, Botswana, and Lesotho. Malta represented in the march past by a special contingent, because Malta, of course, won the George Cross in the Second World War for the courage of the island as a whole in resisting constant German bombing raids and keeping the lines of communication to the Western Desert open. And now Barbados, Mauritius, Swaziland, Tonga, Fiji, Bangladesh, Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, Seychelles, and the Commonwealth of Dominica. And if you travel to any of these countries, you meet people all the time who remember their service or their father's or their grandfather's service in war. The tiny island of St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the troubled country of Zimbabwe, Belize, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Christopher and Nevis, Brunei, Namibia, Cameroon, and Mozambique. And next, the three service chiefs, together, Admiral Sir Michael Boyce for the Navy, General Sir Michael Walker for the Army, and Air Chief Marshal Sir Peter Squire for the Royal Air Force. And now the merchant navy and fishing fleets, the diminutive figure of Miss Margaret Frost of the Merchant Air Services in the centre, and the Chief Inspector of the Fire Services, Graham Meldrum. Margaret Frost flew Spitfires and Mustangs in the war, and is so tiny that once she landed a Spitfire and her commanding officer said, "Goodness, there's a plane landing with nobody at the controls." And now the wreaths by the parade here laid, the Bishop of London will in a moment conduct the short service.
O Almighty God, grant, we beseech thee, that we who here do honor to the memory of those who have died in the service of their country and of the crown may be so inspired by the spirit of their love and fortitude that, forgetting all selfish and unworthy motives, we may live only to thy glory and to the service of mankind, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Now the hymn, O God our help in ages past.
Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, save that of knowing that we do thy will, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, Unto God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace this day and always. Amen.
The trumpeters of the Royal Air Force now sound Rouse, followed by the national anthem. The Queen and members of the royal party leave Whitehall and go back through the entrance of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The Princess Royal will go on to Horse Guards to take a salute of those going past the Cenotaph on their return journey to Horse Guards, where they assembled earlier this morning. And now the clergy leave. The Reverend Prebendary Willie Booth, the Sub-Dean of Her Majesty's Chapels Royal. The Bishop of London and his chaplain, the Reverend William Gilliford. Led by the Sergeant of the Vestry, David Baldwin. And the children of the Chapel Royal finish the procession. Now the politicians, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition. Sir Edward Heath is there, the father of the house, mentioned in dispatches in the Second World War, walking beside Baroness Thatcher. John Major behind, Ian Paisley, John Prescott, Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now the High Commissioners follow them. And they go through the line of Venture Scouts, who always form the Guard of Honour here, all of whom have the Queen's Medal. And they're followed by General Sir Charles Guthrie and the chiefs of the Navy, Army and Royal Air Force staff. And after them, the religious denominations. The Roman Catholic Church, Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi, is here, the moderator of the Free Church Council, president of the Methodist Conference, president of the Baptist Union, and the Unitarian and Free Christian churches, as well as the president of the Council of Christians and Jews. The Salvation Army is represented as well, and of course the figures of the Buddhists and Sikhs and Muslims here for the first time. And next to leave, the General Officer commanding London District and Major General commanding the Household Division, Major General Sir Evelyn Webb Carter, escorted by his Chief of Staff and his aide-de-camp. And so as the main participants in the parade and service at the Cenotaph leave Whitehall, Major Richard Maundrell, 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, stands the parade easy. And it's the turn of the National President of the Royal British Legion, Lieutenant General Sir Roderick Cordy-Simpson, to lay his wreath. Sir Roderick Cordy-Simpson was elected just this year as President of the Royal British Legion. He's a former Royal Hussar. He commanded the 4th Armoured Brigade, the 1st Armoured Division. He served in Bosnia, and he was finally Deputy Commander of NATO forces in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the work of the Royal British Legion for ex-servicemen, of course, goes on now as ever before. In fact, only yesterday we were told that 1 in 5 of the homeless sleeping rough are former servicemen unable to adapt to civilian life, and that's exactly the kind of work that the Royal British Legion devotes itself to from the funds it raises through its Poppy Day appeals leading up to this day, Remembrance Day. Now the National Chairman of the Women's Section, Doris Ingham, National Chairman of the Royal British Legion Scotland, Alan Sutherland, the Deputy Grand President of the British Commonwealth Ex-Services League, General Sir Edward Burgess, with their wreath carriers, and the Vice Chairman of the Royal Naval Association, Frederick Chambers, and of the Royal Air Force Association, Air Chief Marshal Sir John Sutton. And representing London Transport, Georgina Porter, London Transport, who were invited here to the Cenotaph many, many years ago because of the courage of the London bus drivers who drove troops in the First World War right up to the front, one of whom was said to have actually taken 12 enemy soldiers captive and put them on the top of his bus and driven them back to headquarters. Trumpet voluntary comes to an end. This empty tomb of the Cenotaph stands for millions who died in war, buried elsewhere or in no known grave, and each year at this time reminds us of the bleak fields of Flanders with their sombre crop of white stones. In unimaginable numbers, the dead of Britain and the Commonwealth lie alongside their allies and their enemies. But there are war graves here in Britain too, nearly 200,000 in over 1,000 different sites. In the heart of the Lincolnshire countryside is the village of Scopwick. Its church has recorded the comings and goings of the community for hundreds of years. But in the cemetery behind the church are names of people born far from Scopwick who died here. Pilots of World War II stationed at the nearby RAF Digby. On one gravestone is an inscription whose words were heard across the whole world over 40 years after they were written.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us by the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them as they waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God.
The poem High Flight was written by pilot officer John McGee. McGee was American, but he was educated at Rugby School in England. He won the Poetry Prize there, as his hero Rupert Brooke had before the First World War. And like Brooke, McGee wanted to fight. He joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, flying out of Digby. Exhilarated by high-altitude flying, he said he felt like Icarus as he soared higher than Mount Everest. Ben Benyons, a fighter ace with 12 kills to his name, felt the same exhilaration.
I never met the man, but I met his poem when I went up to 30,000 feet. Oh, I've slipped the surly bonds of Earth, because Earth is a bit surly, is it not? And I'd escaped all the wrath of the people on the ground, all the nastiness. It was beautiful. I'd like to spend the rest of my life up there, probably will.
While he was still in training, McGee's Spitfire collided with another aircraft and he was killed. His idol, Rupert Brooke, had also died before his dream of glory could be fulfilled, of an infection brought on by an insect bite. But both poets achieved immortality through their words. Rupert Brooke with his romantic view of war. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. McGee, an American laid to rest in a foreign field, had written to his mother shortly before his death, and on the back of the letter he wrote the words which to many airmen still best describe the mystery of flight.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of Earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. I've wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue. I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where neither lark nor even eagle flew. And whilst with silent lifting mind, I trod the high, trustless sanctity of space, I put out my hand and touched the face of God.
The veterans are waiting now for the start of the march past. when the Guards bands and the Royal Marines and Royal Air Force bands play the old songs that they know so well as they march proudly past the Cenotaph, each one giving a wreath to be laid at the foot until the whole of the bottom of the Cenotaph will be full of flowers. And leading the march past this year, a large contingent of Korean veterans. It was 40 years ago this year that North Korea invaded the South, the United Nations responding by sending a force to the South to drive the communists back. And Britain was second only to the Americans in the numbers it sent to fight. In all, 87,000 British troops served in Korea, the majority of them national servicemen, and 1,000 of them lost their lives. Joe Hubble, at the head of this delegation, a regular in the Black Watch, remembers the acute discomfort of life at the front.
Tremendous heat, dust, the stench from the paddy fields, snakes, rats in the hooches where you lived. I certainly remember waking up one night. I was either due to go out on duty, and there was a rat sitting on my chest looking at me. There's going to be an awful lot of lads, and certainly many, that I haven't seen since those days in Korea. There will be many. We may well have a dram or two.
Korean veterans form the largest part of today's march past. There are over 1,500 of them expected to turn up. And everybody who's come here today, hundreds of miles, many of them, has come with difficulty, braving the weather and the difficulty of getting here. Many of them perhaps going to the Festival of Remembrance at the Albert Hall last night and on to regimental and association dinners or receptions while they're here in London. It's not possible this morning to identify every group that marches past. There are so many of them. Some just 10 or 12 people from an organization, some many more. This is still the Korean veterans going past. One we saw a moment ago from the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, on the left of the screen there. And this is a particularly proud moment for these Korean veterans. They felt that the war in Korea was one of those wars that somehow got forgotten. Next year they're going to be celebrating the event, and there'll be stories told and history retold and films made about it, and they will finally get the recognition they felt they deserved. You recognize, of course, the tune "There'll Always Be an England." All the tunes they play are ones that are known to these veterans on parade. And after that impressive parade of Korean veterans, behind them come the men and women representing Blesma, the charity for blind and limbless ex-servicemen. Among them, Ron Bowie, who's now 81, who served in Europe and then in Burma.
I think it's the most moving thing I've ever witnessed in my life. Because once a year, when the silence comes on, before the hymn, your mind goes back, and particularly the last place of combat, which was Burma, Kohima, where they stopped the Japanese moving and taking over India. There's the epitaph. When you go home, you tell them, we gave our today for your tomorrow.
The Royal Hospital Chelsea, led by the Adjutant Brigadier Kim Ross in their scarlet coats and their black tricorn hats. Applause from the crowds who came here 2 hours ago to make sure they would be able to watch this march past, a very splendid sight. And behind them, Queen Alexandra's Hospital Home, a permanent home with full nursing care for disabled servicemen, the 5 wheelchairs being pushed there. And we move on to the next column. We now go back to the Royal Navy and their support forces, the Russian convoys, represented, led by Jock Dempster, who was a junior seaman, in their white berets, which symbolize the snow and the ice of the Arctic. And the Royal Navy Association follows them, 300 members. The Association of Wrens, led by Beryl Abbott. Wrens served in World War I as well as II. And then, led by Lieutenant Commander Stewart, who was second in command of HMS Amethyst, the representatives of the famous Yangtze incident, when the frigate got caught up the Yangtze River and had to make its escape in a daring way at dead of night. The Fleet Air Arm, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary as a Fleet Air Arm Armourers Association, the people responsible for fitting the explosive weapons to naval aircraft. They celebrate Taranto night every year, when the swordfish from HMS Illustrious sank the Italian fleet on the 11th of November 1940. The LST and Landing Craft Association, which played such an important part in the landings at Sicily and Salerno and Anzio, and of course on D-Day. And then behind them, the North Russia Club, for all those who served on convoys or ashore in North Russia during World War II. And the Russian Convoy Club are there as well. The Maritime Royal Artillery are here. When it was realized the Navy couldn't supply the gunners for the ships of the Merchant Marine, they turned to the army and created the Maritime Royal Artillery. Only volunteers served. 3,000 of 17,000 were killed. The Royal Marines Association, a distinguished regiment formed in 1664 as the Admiral's Regiment, not called the Royal Marines until 1802. Many of them now fulfilling the role of commandos, every man trained to commando level before they get the Green Beret. And also in this line of column, the Polish Ex-Combatants Association. Poles who represent men and women of all services. Many of them were prisoners in Siberia, and after Russia was attacked by Germany, went on fighting. They couldn't go back, of course, to Poland. They fought through Italy and were famously involved in the Battle of Monte Cassino, where 1,000 were killed and 3,000 wounded. And their black berets with the Polish eagle. The Parachute Regiment Association, led by Tom Schaffer, the national standard bearer of the Parachute Association. They were recognized this year when a museum was opened at Pegasus Bridge in Normandy to remember one of their most famous actions. But they've also seen action, apart from the Second World War, in Northern Ireland, in the Falklands, in Kosovo, and most recently in Sierra Leone. Their distinctive maroon berets. And then the Beachley Old Boys Association, the training centre for army mechanics that it was felt were better trained by the services rather than outside. The association was formed in 1939. Behind them come the Foreign Legion Association, celebrating their 50th anniversary for all ex-legionnaires who've completed 5 years service. The life president of the Foreign Legion Association trained in Morocco and fought in the Norway campaign in 1940 and then served with the Chindits under Ord Wingate in Burma. They have green berets and dark blue blazers. Jason, the guide dog, accompanying Charles Buick of the Royal Signals Association, celebrating its 80th anniversary, responsible for setting up lines of communication and have seen action in almost every theatre of war. And then the First Army Association, the British First Army, which landed in Algeria in November 1942 to occupy Algeria and Tunisia and threaten the rear of the German and Italian forces, which were under attack by the British Eighth Army in the Western Desert. The army was involved in very heavy fighting in Tunisia throughout the winter of 1942 and 1943. And then after 1943 absorbed into the British Eighth Army or the United States Fifth Army. .300 members of the National Service Veterans Alliance, the national servicemen who we were talking about earlier, who fought in Korea, and after the war for many years, all young men were called up for their 2 years of national service and served throughout the world, particularly in Cyprus and in Suez. Here also the Trucial Oman Scouts Association. The Trucial Oman Scouts, founded 50 years ago to police the coastline along the South Arabian border. followed by the South Atlantic Medal Association. And occasionally you'll see, as you see there, a young child walking with them. It's a tradition here that wives and children can either accompany or more often represent members of their family in this march past. The Market Garden Veterans Association, don't be misled by the title. The Market Garden was the code name for the liberation of Holland in September 1944. Market referred to the airborne troops, Garden referred to the ground troops. And 100 of them are marching here. And the Bond van Wapenrode, led by Fritz Stapel. The association was founded in 1978, and it's an organization of all the Dutch veterans of both world wars. The Dutch who fought with such distinction alongside the British, both in the air and on the ground in the Second War, after their country had been overrun. They carry a wreath of Dutch flowers with red, white and blue ribbon, and their badge with its 2 crossed daggers and a lion above it. And they're followed by the delegation from St. Dunstan's, 100 strong, led by Captain Michael Gordon Lennox, their president and the wreath bearer. And somewhere in there is General Sir Peter de la Billière, who is pushing one of the youngest members of St. Dunstan's in his wheelchair to draw attention to the fact that it is young people as well as old now who take part in this march past, because of all the wars that have been fought since the end of the Second World War. Wars in which over 2,500 people have been killed. In Palestine, Malaya, on the Yangtze, in Korea, in Egypt, in Suez, in Kenya, in Cyprus, in Borneo, in Aden, the list goes on, in Oman and Dhofar, in Northern Ireland, in the Falklands, in the Gulf, in Bosnia and Kosovo and Sierra Leone. The Aden Veterans Association, for all the forces who were in Aden, 68 British servicemen died there. And the Black Watch Regiment Association, Scotland's senior regiment, led by Major Mackenzie Johnson, Major Watson, Captain Wilson, Captain Wormel. The senior regiment founded in 1715, 25 battalions of the Black Watch saw action during World War I. In World War II, in almost every campaign they were found, particularly in the breakout from Tobruk in 1941, distinguished by their headdress of the blue berry and the red shackle. The Chindits Old Comrades Association. The Chindits, led by Major General Ord Wingate, specially trained in commando methods, to go behind Japanese lines in Burma. They were out of touch, contact only by radio, supplies, if they were lucky, by airdrop. And they have a wreath with a Chindit logo. And then the Far East Prisoners of War Association. At the end of the war, when they came back from years of misery and torture and disease and starvation, the survivors of the Japanese prisoner of war camps were paid just £76 by the British government. This year, with only 7,000 of them still alive, they've been offered £10,000 each. Fred Ryle, captured in Java, spent 3.5 years as a prisoner.
And I found a piece of string, and I took it round my waist and put a knot in it. And I've still got that piece of string. And as I look at it now, I still have to say, I can't believe I was as thin as this. And so when I walk past the Cenotaph, I will be thinking of all those people who died unnecessarily and mercilessly. And I shall be thinking of the comradeship we shared. And I shall be thinking also of the motto of the Far East Prisoner of War Association, to keep going, the spirit that kept us going.
Colonel Bogey plays as the Guards Parachute Association, their maroon berets, goes past. The Old Cryptians Club, a school which sent 329 members to the Great War. 58 didn't come back, and 78 of the members of the school died in World War II. The Royal Military Police Association, with the red berets, with the Royal Military Police cap badge, led by Brigadier Ian Cameron, formed in 1946, just at the end of the Second World War. They include the former Corps of Military Police, Royal Military Police, the Military Medalists League. George V instituted the military medal in 1916. And not only does it celebrate the owners of the medal, but it also looks after them and their families, particularly of help to them during the Depression in the 30s. And in truth, these huge numbers of people from all these different organizations, most of which there's not time to mention, is only scratching the surface of all the organizations that took part in the First and Second World War. Over 200 organizations here, and more applying each year to take part. Because I think, in a way, to the astonishment of the British Legion who organised this march, they've succeeded beyond their wildest dreams in bringing the sacrifice of these wars back to people's attention, particularly to the young. The celebrations of VE Day and VJ Day 5 years ago seemed to rekindle interest, and this year's 60th anniversary of the evacuation of Dunkirk and the Battle of Britain once again showed the war hadn't been forgotten. Nor indeed the Ulster Defence Regiment Association, in green blazers there going past, formed 30 years ago as a support force to the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and many of them have lost their lives, not just directly while serving, but after they'd left the regiment. 60 of them have been killed after they were no longer serving in the Ulster Defence Regiment. Now the Air Forces, the Royal Air Forces Association, the 7th Squadron Association, the last squadron of the Royal Flying Corps, formed after the outbreak of World War I. The Aircrew Association, for all men who've served in theatres from World War II to the present day. And their forage hats with red piping. The Aircrew Association, formed for all those men with their distinctive forage caps, and among them down there, processing past the Cenotaph, Reg Moore, who joined the Royal Air Force in 1941 and flew with Bomber Command as a wireless operator.
You cannot help but feel the tragedy of war and all the you know, service people and civilians who died during successive world wars, and the futility of it. And you know, it's very sad, very sad. But when we finish back up on a Horse Guards parade, you know, we start chatting again, and we've done our duty to pay homage in the best way that we can.
As they march past, they hand in their wreaths, and the base of the Cenotaph gradually fills with red poppies. And also this year, for the first time, apart from the military contingents, the Royal British Legion have enlarged the numbers of those who come to include the home front, the civilian services. So all kinds of organisations have applied to take part, and among them we'll see later on the Women's Land Army, for instance, the Bevan Boys, who went down the mines by conscription, 50,000 of them. The Merchant Navy, who've never been here before, and perhaps most controversial of all, and after a great deal of battling on their behalf by the Royal British Legion, the Shot at Dawn Society, the World War I Pardon Society, for over 300 soldiers who were shot as an example to others, shot as deserters, but often in very contentious circumstances. And later on in the parade, we'll see them go past too. So the idea of this parade has been to widen it out to include not just those in the front line or the support forces, but also those who fought at home. This is the Women's Auxiliary Air Force Association, in their distinctive blue tartan kilts, led by Ruby Mallinson, their chairman. Women were recruited into the Royal Air Force way back in 1918, and not just as the famous plotters in the Battle of Britain that we saw earlier this year, but in every form, as code breakers, as telephonists, radio operators, drivers, ground crews, and of course serving by flying planes. In those days we didn't go into battle, but flying fighter planes and troop carriers on delivery trips. And the RAF Regiment Comrades Association, the ground gunners, which was formed to defend airfields, being watched from the balcony of the Foreign Office. All the balconies along Whitehall are full. They're watching as the parade goes past. The Air Gunners Association, 50 members, and London Transport. Their delegation led by John Nichols, a former soldier whose son was killed in Bosnia. And it was George V, as I said earlier, who gave London Transport recognition to come here to the Cenotaph because of their work, not here in London, but at the front line in the First World War in France and Flanders. The Bevin boys in their white miners' hats here for the first time. And behind them, the Women's Land Army for the first time this year. The Land Girls, the British Women's Land Army Society, has been invited to take part in the march past. These women worked doing the tough jobs that before the war had been mainly kept for men. And as a schoolgirl, Sheila Dent, who's here today, had seen the destruction of the East End in bombing raids, and then in 1942 joined the Land Army and was posted to Devon.
I don't think I thought of it as doing my bit for the war. I think I like the uniform, to be honest. I don't know if you've ever seen the uniform. I mean, the hats are like a cowboy hat, you know, a Stetson, so that was fine, you know. I thought that's what... But I enjoyed it, I really did. It was a good life. They come from everywhere, you know, there was posh girls. But everybody clicked. It's something I'm glad I did. I've never regretted it. And I'd do it all over again if I had a chance. I really would.
The Evacuees Reunion Association wearing the labels of evacuees on their coats. There also for the first time. They are here to remember many evacuees who lost their lives through enemy action or helping with war work, and particularly 77 people who lost their lives when the ship, the City of Benares, carrying evacuee children to Canada, was torpedoed. An imaginative way, the brown luggage label, which children had put on their coats when their parents said goodbye to them at the railway stations and set off for the country or abroad, not knowing when they would see them again. The London Ambulance Service leads the next column, 70 members on parade, and followed by the St Andrews Ambulance Association. And then the Metropolitan Police Special Constabulary. The Church Lads and the Church Girls Brigade, in blue shirts and blue trousers with a red stripe, founded in 1883. And behind them, for the first time again, members of the Post Office. And also in this column, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Here because of the work they did in the First World War. And now, the Merchant Navy Association. It's just been announced by the government that the 3rd of September each year will be designated Merchant Navy Day to celebrate the work these people did. 33,000 lost in the war. And the 3rd of September is particularly important for the Merchant Navy. It's the day that the unarmed liner Athena was torpedoed with the loss of its passengers and crew, the first casualties of the Merchant Navy in the war. Well, it's good to see the merchant service at last recognized here. St John Ambulance, led by Stuart Latham, looking after civilians in every town and city that was devastated by bombing in both world wars. They also served way back in the Boer War. They were formed in 1897. And also here the firefighters, because during the Blitz on Britain's cities, they played an invaluable part at great risk always from collapsing buildings, trying to prevent fires spreading, trying to rescue those who were trapped. And they're included for the first time this year too. Albert Dimmock served in London as a volunteer.
This B-2 rocket landed on the houses and the stables. All horses were affected. And also a woman come out of a public house on the corner and she says, my husband's under the bar. We're trapped under the bar. And as she opened the door to let us go in to rescue him, the lintel of the doorway, concrete lintel, fell down onto her. And I think it killed her actually, but we don't know because they took her away. It's a great honour to represent all those thousands that died, not only in London, Bristol and other parts, Coventry.
The Scouts Association, the Army Pigeon Society, and members of Equity. ENSA, the Entertainment National Service Association, come at the end of this column. ENSA, who entertained the troops. Max Bygrave's there among them, who joined the Royal Air Force as second-class aircraftman number 121-2094. And they're here because they entertained the troops. They said they enjoyed it. They didn't know whether they were or weren't in danger, but clearly at some times they were. And as part of this attempt to embrace the whole national effort of war, they've been invited to take part. And so as the bands move away and the march past comes to an end here in Whitehall, we've seen perhaps over 10,000 people marching in an act of remembrance. Most of them, of course, elderly, many of them now frail. But when they fought, they were young, teenagers, or in their early 20s, like these sailors and soldiers, the same age as many of the young people who've been present on parade or who've been watching on the pavements. Nearly 200 contingents passed the Cenotaph, men and women with their own memories of those lost and of the suffering they endured in wars fought for our freedom. For the growing number of us who've never had to fight, this day is a sobering reminder of what they were called on to do. We can be grateful for their courage and determination, and we can perhaps learn a little from their example. They deserve to be honored and remembered. In Shakespeare's famous words, from this day to the ending of the world.